Hi, welcome to Tonnau Talks. Today we are going to be talking about understanding words and actions. And I've got some very special guests with me today. I've got Cerys Beckett and Kim Jenkins from Speech and Language. As you can see on the screen there, we've got our QR code, so you can use that to explore other Tonnau Talks on a variety of different subjects. And obviously they all tie in very nicely with today's Tonnau Talks with understanding words and actions. So I'm very lucky to be joined today by Cerys Beckett, who is a specialist speech and language therapist for Neath Talbot, and Kim Jenkins, who is a highly specialist speech and language therapist as well. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today and coming on our Tonnau Talks podcast. First and foremost, I think it'd be really helpful for us to understand, what brought you into the role of being a speech and language therapist? What is it that you like about that? And tell us a little bit more about your job role, what it involves, and what's the day like for yourselves?
So I suppose I came into speech and language therapy. I always liked working with children.
Yeah.
I had younger cousins that I used to like spending time with, and it just sort of developed from there, really. So when I first started in speech and language therapy, I worked mainly with preschool and school age primary school children.
Yeah.
And then found a bit of a niche in secondary age, working with children in different secondary education settings, and then non-education settings as well, like education other than at school settings. And I suppose I went from there to youth justice, where I currently am, and absolutely love it.
Wow. Okay. So thank you, Kim. So like you explained there how you started kind of working with preschool children, primary age children, and interestingly to say now you work with adolescents, our teenagers. And, it might be surprising for our parents to know that actually our teenagers do have, speech and language needs as well. So that'll be interesting for us to dig more into as we go on.
It is very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. Cerys, what about yourself?
So I came to the profession a little bit later. I was a mature student, went back when my children got to be about 5 and 3, to watch their language develop really sparked something in me. So I went back and qualified a few years ago now. And I'm really fortunate that I've got a split post. So I work within the Flying Start team, so with the little children before they go to school. And then half my week then is spent with Kim in the Youth Justice Service. So working with your older children, top primary and into secondary, into college then as well.
Oh, so quite a variety then.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you both work, across the ages, or you have done, and now you both work with adolescents. It's interesting to try and understand, why do you get involved with children? What would be the things that you'd be looking at? What type of child is referred to your service?
So within youth justice, I suppose, we work with children that might get into trouble out in the community or in school, at risk of school exclusion. So we see just one little population, I suppose, of the whole speech and language cohort. So we look at different things to do with speech, although a lot of the older children, young people, don't have these speech difficulties anymore. So with speech, we're thinking about how they pronounce different sounds. Language, then a lot of our young people struggle with understanding vocabulary, following instructions. So in school, they might only be able to follow 2-part instructions, isn't it? Where teachers might give them 3 or 4 parts to understand, and they really have difficulties with that. And expressing themselves. They really find it difficult to find the words that they want to use to put into sentences, and that's where we might see some behaviour outburst then, because it's quite frustrating when you can't express yourself.
Okay, so interestingly there, you've mentioned that a speech and language therapist is not only involved with speech sounds. So you may have, I think a lot of people know that, speech and language difficulties can be present in terms of how people talk and speak and how they pronounce different sounds. But also there you mentioned about understanding language. And I think that's something that's quite interesting, is that, obviously our children are immersed in language, aren't they? And you were mentioning that even our teenagers, even though they can speak clearly, potentially, actually, they don't understand a number of words used in a sentence. Like you said, two-part instructions. So that would involve, picking the red cup and placing it in the green box, for example. And it's like understanding two different parts of that instruction. And you mentioned that a lot of the time our children, our adolescents in schools, teachers are using 3 or 4-part instructions, and that's a lot of information, isn't it? So again, it's about understanding that speech and language therapists not only work with sound production, but also understanding all those different parts of the language and the vocabulary. Okay, thank you. That's really interesting to understand that. And Keris, I'm wondering, what's the difference then with early years? Because you've got that part of your role, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think it's often it is often easier to spot difficulties in younger children, if the first words are not coming, or they're not developing their understanding and kind of looking at you blankly when you're giving instructions. So, often looking at how those differences come to light and kind of helping and supporting that. So I think parents are often more open to referrals or support at that younger age.
Yeah.
When things are starker, clearer to see, difficulties with speech sounds, how they're saying words often stand out, and that's easier to be identified. But then when the skills are coming and children are quite chatty, sometimes we underestimate what it is that they're not understanding, or what it is that's kind of, or they're developing skills that kind of can hide that a little bit.
Okay.
So they're watching their peers, they're following the class routine, and then you're not seeing the digging down of what's kind of going, those difficulties that might be present there.
Right, okay. So that helps us understand then why a child might need support from your service later on in life, in adolescence, because like you mentioned there, in the early years, they can be missed. So even though often it's easier to spot, because they develop, those early stages of using language and following instructions. Actually, what you mentioned there, how easy it can be for children to be missed, because they will follow along the routines and, that peer support in the classroom.
Yeah, the demands increase, doesn't it? As a child gets older, the language that we use with them gets more complicated. Your expectations of them are higher, and they might have coped quite nicely through those early years, and then you suddenly get to a point where the social demands on them, the educational demands on them, or the thoughts and feelings that they're trying to express, mixed in with all those hormone things that come along as well.
Yeah.
But suddenly they're not coping, that they're not able to express it, or they're still using that simple vocabulary that they would have been using as a younger child. Yeah. And that sometimes then gets harder to explain in terms of, well, they're talking, they're putting sentences together, they look okay, why are we having these issues?
Yeah. And I guess that's helpful to understand in terms of, when we're understanding children and language, it isn't simply about, are they speaking clearly? There's so much that you mentioned there, including, the social demands. Like social language is different to sort of that functional language, understanding, how to communicate socially in acceptable ways. But also when you mentioned about the educational language, the language they use in education is very different to what we'd use at home, isn't it? And there's so much vocabulary that kids need to develop across the years and the lifespan. Actually, I can see now where a child may be understanding their colours and numbers, and being able to kind of have those conversations and following general instructions when they're younger. But as they grow and those demands increase for more vocabulary and more complex kind of language interactions, that's where you can start spotting it. So I can see now why it's not as simple, is it, as just early years, you know. It is actually the range of language that children need to develop and use increases as they age, doesn't it? And actually, you're finding, Kim, I know in working in youth justice, that there's a case where children have been missed, haven't they? And that's not through, you know, lack of understanding, but actually it's because those demands have increased, you know, and that their capacity has been, you know, somewhat, their needs have been, overlooked sometimes, I think.
I do notice as well, there's a big jump from primary to secondary.
Yeah.
So Kerry's mentioned about the demands, going even from infants to juniors is a big jump there, but then going from juniors to secondary, they've got different teachers with different teaching styles, different vocabulary coming up in different subjects. They've got to navigate their way through the school day on their own, through the school environment, the new building. So we do see a big jump in demands going up to secondary as well.
Okay. You mentioned there about your service and what kind of things you look at, and you look at things like differences. What do you mean by language differences between children?
So I think it's important to kind of reiterate that there are kind of three broad areas that we're kind of looking at. So your speech, so you know the sounds that within those words, how you pronounce words, how you cope with longer words. So language. So in terms of what it is, what that message is that you're trying to convey, what the message that you're trying to understand. So you've got your expressive and your receptive language there, and communication. You know, we can communicate so much more than just using the words. You know, your looks, your gestures, that facial expression. You can tell someone you are angry with just one look, can't you? And
tone of voice as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Things like that.
Kind of all plays into that. So a child might be having difficulties understanding your instruction, but might be quite chatty, might have quite a lot of language to use with you. Or it might be that they're understanding, but they can't quite find those words quick enough to get that message out. Or when the pressure's on them, the kind of that pressure, that finding of words suddenly just abandons them when they're kind of really struggling to express themselves. Or it might be a bit of an anxiety around chatting in different environments, so things like selective mutism, where, you know, amongst friends, really social, really chatty, adult steps in or kind of feel that slight bit of pressure and that ability to kind of leave them and go quiet.
Okay, so you mentioned there's like three kind of strands to it in a way. So the receptive language you mentioned that's the understanding of language. So listening to someone else's words and vocabulary. Then you said there's the expressive language, and in a way there's not only about their speech and how they pronounce words and sounds, but it's also whether they can get the words out, isn't it? So they may not have the vocabulary in their mind, in their memory box, that they can use to express themselves. So, for example, they may understand someone asking them a question, but they just can't get the answer out. And then you mentioned about how anxiety kind of steps in sometimes, where a child might be quite happy chatting with their friends and using the language within their social group, but as soon as an adult steps in or starts using language around them, they can sometimes shut down. I know we did a podcast before on selective mutism, so that's, I mentioned how they tie in, don't they? And that is a huge area of need, isn't it? Selective mutism, and often misunderstood as well, isn't it, as a choice. But it's not a choice. It's not a defiance in a way. It's actually an inability to produce those responses, and it can be really difficult for our kids, can't it?
Absolutely. And you think about, we've all been in those situations where you suddenly freeze up and you're thinking of interviews, or you've gone to the doctor and something's embarrassing and you just can't find those words to kind of to express those ideas or to put into words how you're really feeling. And that's a horrible feeling, isn't it? You know, in a 20-minute interview, the pressure, the flustering that goes on. And then for some of our children, that's their day-to-day life from morning till night. So you can understand how they feel and how you end up seeing some of the behaviours that challenge us as adults. Then it's like it's dark.
Yeah. Well, what kind of, thinking about the children that you work with, the children that come to your service, what are their experiences like having, these language differences?
A lot of our children really struggle in school.
What are those struggles? What do they look like?
So it varies for all the children, really. Like I said before, they might find it difficult to sit in a class, understand instructions. They might find it difficult to understand what the teachers are saying or what's expected of them. And I suppose as they get older, they learn to, I suppose, hide their differences quite well. So if they're not understanding something in class, and they don't want their peers to know that they're not understanding, so they might act out in class just to get sent out, to get themselves away from that situation. So we see that a lot, result in exclusions and things like that then.
Wow. Okay, so having those language differences in school, especially in secondary education, you mentioned there, that sometimes can result in them getting excluded. So you can see there where their needs, their language differences are actually misinterpreted as behaviour. Yeah. And as we know, I preach about this, behaviour is communication, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Keris, when you said about, we communicate so much with our facial expressions, with our pitch, tone, even the speed at which we speak, and the fact that, that's been misunderstood, isn't it, sometimes in our schools, sadly. And our schools are doing, a great job of trying to support our children, but as we know, there's such a range of needs, and especially when kids go to secondary education, like you said, Kim, they go to different teachers, don't they? And they don't have that chance to develop that relationship with that one key teacher that sees them every day and is able to kind of spot when they're not feeling their best and, not having a great day. And it's such a shame then that they kind of get misunderstood and their behaviour becomes seen as a choice and kind of disruptive or whatever it may be. So yeah, I'm thinking in terms of in the early years, Keris, what kind of things are our younger children experiencing it when they comes to their language differences?
You see lots of frustration, lots of emotional outbursts. If you think about it, if you went on holiday and you couldn't speak the language, or you had a set vocabulary that you had, you can ask for a drink, you can maybe ask for your favourite food. And then suddenly you've lost your luggage or you've missed your flight, and suddenly those words you don't have, and you're in a heightened state already, you want to be able to chat and share those, if that message is getting broken down, how that would feel. You can understand why they're suddenly having these kind of outbursts, and parents are really finding that frustrating and quite challenging. Because we want to do the best for our children, and then there's this breakdown in the communication. And then, your anxiety, as parents, our anxiety goes up that we can't understand them, and then we kind of feeding off each other then. So you can see lots of this frustration behaviour coming through. Or equally, if they, from a expressing themselves point of view or a speech point of view, because even if those sounds are tricky, they might choose not to communicate with you because they know it doesn't work anyway. So what's the point? And kind of see them kind of withdrawing into themselves. And that for me is where that communication breakdown is really sad to see, and that is where we kind of really want to develop those skills in our younger children, so that we don't see that, so that we're fostering these beautiful relationships. I think that is something that we see quite a lot in the younger children.
Yeah, and I love your analogy there about how, being in a foreign land, land and with like obviously on holiday, and like how to order the simple stuff. But yeah, when a problem comes about and you need to ask for help for a specific thing, and you don't have the vocabulary, but you know what you want to say. And
it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because you're trying to explain yourself with all the different words that you may have, and the person listening is getting the wrong gist. And I think that happens a lot, doesn't it, with our younger children, where they maybe chat at you, and you don't understand what they're saying, and you can understand then why that frustration at you it becomes the issue for that child then, because
absolutely
they're trying.
Yeah. And you bear in mind, as an adult, you've probably got a whole host of other skills that you're using to explain. You might want to act things out, you might want to gesture it, you might be able to write things down.
Yeah.
Our children don't have those backup skills either.
Yeah.
So that's additionally tricky for them. So yeah.
But I think what Keris has mentioned, like with the young children, they get frustrated. The older ones, they get frustrated as well. We just see the behaviour. I think it's bigger, isn't it? As they get older, the behaviour gets bigger, and that's concerning then as well.
And I think as they get older, they expect, like with a 2-year-old trying to communicate to us, we kind of go, they're 2.
Yeah.
I'm going to help, is it this or is it that? You can help them a bit. But our adolescents, we expect them to know.
Yeah.
Because they have been communicating, and actually we think, well, no, you've got a vocabulary. I see you talking to your friends, and actually it's harder for us to show that kind of empathy in a way, and patience, and understanding. And that is very kind of key, isn't it? In terms of thinking about our parents listening in, and we've got a variety here where we've got children that are a bit younger, and they're just sort of developing the vocabulary, developing that ability to kind of understand an adult's language. And again, we do tend to talk a little bit more simply to our younger children. Now we've got our, adolescents. We mentioned there about being misunderstood, and I think one thing you both mentioned is frustration. Is that's something we do see with children that may be struggling to not only understand language, that receptive language, but also to say what they need to say, which is our expressive language. I'm just wondering, how else would you tell that a child is having difficulties with language, apart from the frustration that we both mentioned, that you mentioned for our younger children and our adolescents? What other things could
maybe things like asking for repetition or not following out on instructions?
Probably part of an instruction if they've only grasped that initial part.
There's a part of piece of work that we do. We ask them instructions involving before and after.
Okay.
A lot of teenagers really struggle with before and after, don't they? So they might do the first part and not the second. So it's things
and
like
that all depends on where you put before and after in the sentence, isn't it? Which is interesting because we use that so much, don't we? And in a way, we use those words to help explain the instruction, but actually it makes it more confusing.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So we speak to teachers as parents about breaking it down. Like, how can they do it simpler? Maybe talking about first, next, and then, instead of using the before and after until they've been taught.
Yeah. And you mentioned there as well, them only carrying out part of the instruction, and sometimes that can be seen as defiance in a way, isn't it? I asked you to do this, but you only did that bit, and a lot of children are kind of confused at that point because they may not have understood the bit that they didn't do, or again, they didn't have the memory to keep that information, all those instructions in mind.
And memory is a huge element of following those instructions, being able to, there's a lot going on when instructions are given to you, and you've got to pay attention to it, you've got to understand it, you've got to process it, you've got to remember it, you've then got to do it, not get distracted partway through because you were focused on one element of it, and there's just so much of a demand on them. And then you're throwing in noisy classrooms, someone's called them across the room, or some of the things happened outside, and you've lost your train of thought. And there's so many competing demands on our children, and if we can do anything to make that simpler for them and make it clearer, then that's all going to benefit all of us.
And that's the thing, isn't it? A simple instruction of go tidy your bedroom. What does that actually mean? Tidy in my words of go tidy your bedroom to my daughter would be change the bedding, hoover, put your washing by the washing machine. It's all those things that in that tiny little sentence of go tidy your bedroom, that I mean a lot of instructions. And I just take it for granted that she knows what my version of tidy means compared to hers. And it's interesting that, teachers will use it in schools, isn't it? Open your books and carry on from where we left off in the last lesson, and again, it's like, well, what do I need to do first? What does that mean to just carry on? And it's so important that there's so much to language that we often miss in the first place, I'm just thinking in terms of, some of the things that we see with our children. What would cause them to have differences in their language?
Again, there's no sort of one clear answer. So some of the children and young people that we work with might have something called developmental language disorder.
Okay.
So difficulties that they've had since birth, growing up. Difficulties with just language, like we've said, the understanding and expressive language. Especially in youth justice, we see some children and young people that have maybe acquired speech and language difficulties, so through a head injury and things like that, or experiencing trauma as well, that can cause difficulties with language communication.
Okay. Are there any other things that would contribute to having those sort of language differences?
Attendance is a big one. Not being in school, due to maybe choosing not to be in school or exclusions, things like that as well to consider.
And I'm just thinking in terms of, when we were thinking about, especially our teenagers in schools, that kind of expressive language that you talk about. So as much as some children may, understand language, have good receptive language skills, but that expressive language often comes out in terms of grunts or shrugs, isn't it? Or I don't know, or some other words that we're not going to say on the podcast, swear words, because they don't know what else to say, and again, it's like often that misrepresentation of, is it a language difficulty or is it them choosing to be defiant? And I think that's one of the difficulties we face, isn't it? And I think that's what you're finding, Kim, in youth justice. Obviously, the children that come to you are having problems within the community, and actually, I'm sure you find a lot of your children do have difficulties with speech and language.
Yeah, and it's just, I suppose, having the chance to unpick that. So we see this behaviour, we've heard about certain behaviours in the school or in the community, but it's unpicking it and seeing, right, what could be the cause of that. And the majority of them have got significant speech language communication difficulties.
And they've managed to get by, haven't they? Hidden in a way, from getting that support earlier on. As we know, the earlier you get support for any difficulty, it's so important, isn't it?
It is,
for the future of our children. I'm just wondering as well, so for example, we've talked about what speech and language differences are and what they could look like in both our younger children and our older children. What support is out there? If I was a parent listening today and I thought, gosh, I think my child might have, speech and language differences, where would I go? What would I do?
I think the first place to go is school.
Okay.
Speak to school, explain your concerns, speak to them if they've got any concerns within the school as well. But like we've said before, some children can hide their differences very well. So they might comply and copy in school where that might not be possible at home, or all their anxieties come out at home, so you might notice it more at home. But it's having that conversation with school to begin with. And
I guess the best person to go to would be the additional learning needs coordinator, where they can do those screenings, can't they, at that level within school. What kind of screenings would they do in school?
So their schools have got access to things like speech link, language link. For the younger years, they might look at like their welcome screenings and any particularly around Talbot, if they're in flying start settings, they've got access to those welcome screenings as well. And if they're not in school yet, you can link with your health visitor. And within Swansea Bay, we've got a QR code so you can self-refer for any speech and language concerns that you have. So you can access that QR code, and you'll have a phone call then to discuss your concerns or an appointment with a therapist.
So what other kind of support can our parents access?
There's lots of support online. So you've got an organisation called I Can. They support speech language communication, and there's a Phasic as well online, which is a speech language charity.
So what kind of support do they offer?
So it's mainly online support. They might have handouts and
resources that can help in understanding and maybe developing. Because I'm just thinking in terms of, you're extremely qualified and skilled in your area, but it's about, say, maybe some tips that parents can do for their kids, isn't it? That they can, provide that immersive language at home as well, because, understandably, you've got a certain amount of time, haven't you, as speech and language therapists to work with a child. And I think in terms of the input that parents and schools can have is huge, isn't it?
And you might just be slightly concerned, or you might sort of be toying with the idea that there's a difficulty. So, these resources then can give you ideas and things to try, or things to compare with. Is there a difficulty? So things like the BBC Tiny Happy People have got a really lovely website from an early years point of view, with loads of tips and strategies and little videos of games that you can try, and supports to put into place. And the Welsh Government's Talk With Me website is really lovely as well, in terms of like they've got 10 top tips, so things to just try in your day-to-day, ways to adjust your language, and things that you can try, just to kind of give you a bit of a benchmark of what you'd be expecting at certain ages and stages of language. And then if you then continue to have those concerns, or you still have you kind of coming round to that idea that maybe there's a difficulty, you can then refer in, rather than kind of feeling like you need to jump to that expert. Quite often there's a lot that we can do and try at home as well.
So what types of things could you try at home? What, in order to support their child, emotionally or behaviourally?
So a big thing for us, even in sort of working in secondary age, is play. Like, play is so important for children of all ages. I know when we think of play, we think of younger children, but the benefits to older children as well. So just taking that time to play, it helps with turn taking, following rules, instructions. Play is really, really important.
I think we take that for granted, don't we, with our older ones, and I think, dare I say it, social media, like our older children far prefer to be on their tablets or devices, don't they? And getting them to engage with us as adults can be quite tricky, can't it?
Yeah, and I think as parents, we're really rushed, aren't we? We are rushed off our feet. But I know at home with my two boys, spending 10 minutes playing, they absolutely love it, and it goes a long way.
I often find those are the moments where they open up to you a little bit as well. So they practice either just that they are having conversations and they chatting to you about what's happened in the day, so that you're building and fostering that relationship. But it's in those moments as well that you might realise, they are still keeping language simple, or that sounds tricky for them. So it's kind of that pressure off moment where you see more of their language rather than just the grunts or
Yeah.
the shrugs or that typical teenage kind of movement.
But even with our younger ones as well, when we ask them a question like, how was school today?
Oh, pressure.
Yeah, boring. What did you do in school today? So let's be more specific with the question. Nothing.
Yeah.
And I just think, oh, and that continues through adolescence, doesn't it? Our teenagers use the same responses. And I think that's right. When you engage with play, it's these incidental conversations might come out where they go, oh yeah, because in school today,
Yeah.
so and so said that, or
Yeah.
we did this, and I think that opens up, because as children are playing, it really supports their emotional regulation and being able to kind of get into that stage where they feel probably more calm and more relaxed, and actually this is something fun they're enjoying. Also, I always say it's like the play is like the complete distraction for the conversation, because you're all looking down, whether you're playing Uno or whatever it may be, you're all looking down, you haven't got that intense eye contact, that pressure to communicate. It's not like an interview. Sometimes it feels like an interview for these poor kids, doesn't it? And I put my hands up as a parent. I've been there and done that and asked those questions.
I do as well.
Yeah. How was your day today? It's like,
yeah, what do you do in school?
Yeah,
they're not ready to talk about anything straight from pickup.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's quite interesting for me to do the speech and language degree later on. So I'd already had my children, and one of the things that we chat about in early years is reducing questions, reducing that demand for like that interview style. I'm what's it doing? What have you got there? What colour's that? What's the cow saying? I look back at my poor kids and I think, oh, it's death question. Whereas when you sit and play and you just kind of inviting or allowing that space.
Yeah.
So lots of parents that I work with, especially when they're really little, have always comment, oh, I'm surprised how quiet you are in that session, because you're giving them that opportunity to communicate with you. And sometimes it is about spending some time without any of that pressure before you kind of delve into assessment to build that relationship. And that's my play, and parents being involved with that, they're going to have a much better relationship with you than they do with that stranger that's come in to test. And
absolutely, yeah. And that's why I was saying there's so much that parents can be doing at home, isn't there? What would be the tips that you'd give parents in order to kind of help their children?
I think the biggest one and the simplest one is just to slow things down, really simplify your language and your words. We quite often, particularly as they get older, assume that knowledge, those words have come along, but they might not know, the words for things, and just keeping things simple means that everybody accesses that words, and then or linking it back. So if you have used like a word that comes up in quite a technical word, then oh, do you know what that one means? And linking it back to a simpler word. So slowing things down and keeping the words as simple as possible.
And I think another thing to consider is if you're seeing a behaviour, try to unpick it. So take your time, think about what is that behaviour trying to tell me.
Yeah, rather than it being a choice, isn't it, that the child's making. It's like trying to understand that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's
what are they communicating?
Yeah. And I always, we've done podcasts before, talking to teens, and one of them is wondering out loud to help them, because often you can go, I'm wondering whether, school has been tough today and you just don't want to talk about it, and whether they can just give you the nod. And you go, you've helped them to feel understood there rather than misunderstood, and it gives them the opportunity to be able to sit with that and come to you at a later time when they're feeling able to go, yeah, school was hard today. And that's where you can then have that conversation.
Modeling that for them, isn't it? Because they might not have the words to tell you that, or the realization that is what was going on, and then you've put it into words. Next time that happens, they've got those.
Yes. And thinking about that in terms of, how we can often misunderstand, communication, behaviour, with that. What are the myths that are out there regarding speech and language differences?
So I think when we see a lot is that a young person might be quite chatty and can engage in conversation, but when we dig deep, they're not understanding.
Yeah.
So just because a young person can talk and engage in conversation, it doesn't mean that they are understanding everything that's going on.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that's one of the biggest myths, isn't it? That, teachers may say, well, I see them talking to their friends, and as soon as I, ask them a question, they don't speak, they refuse to talk to me. And it is important to recognize that. And also that, sometimes when children do respond with, I don't know, it's boring, those kind of responses, often it's because they don't have more language to use to be able to express how they're actually feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it can come across as very dismissive from our kids, can't it? But actually it's a sign that we need to help them.
And I think another myth is that, or they'll grow out of it. The children, they'll grow out of it. It'll just come, and some, and it, it does for some of our children. Just being around the language, they'll develop it. But communication and learning language, it happens within that social context, isn't it? And being around people. So some need that additional support just from environmental changes and support from parents, but some will need that extra layer of support.
Yeah, and I think that's important for us to understand, is that, even though children do develop at different rates, and just because, my 2-year-old can say, 50 words and yours can say 200, doesn't mean that my 2-year-old's got a language, difference in that sense, but it's given them that time and space to develop at their pace. But understanding that sometimes they do need a bit of extra support, and that's okay. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to grow into adults with language, difficulties, but actually it can help them so much, because when they're adolescents, when they're teenagers in that secondary environment, they're better able to cope with the language demands there then, aren't they? Thank you so much. Obviously there's so much to talk about, and I know we literally only tip of the iceberg with all the things that we could have talked to you today about. But before you go, in true Tonnau Talks style, we always like to end with our Tonnau top tips. And I was just hoping that you'd be able to share some top tips for our parents listening in.
So I think the first one, like we've mentioned, is keep instructions simple.
Yeah.
So reduce the amount of maybe words that you're using.
Consider chunking them into steps as well. So rather than, we'll get your coat and your bag and then meet me in the car and then we're going to go, right, can you get your coat? Can you get your bag?
Yeah.
Right, let's go in the car.
Okay. So chunking means like just small steps rather than a big list of instructions. Okay. Any other top tips?
I suppose thinking about the vocabulary that you're using, you don't need to use sort of technical, hard vocabulary, just keep it simple.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, when you're saying about that vocabulary, keeping it simple, but also using similar words as well, because it helps them to start to put vocabulary into like umbrella terms as well, because I think a lot of children are sometimes can have rigid understanding of words, and actually like grouping animals, isn't it? Like farm animals, you've got cow, horse, even though they're very different, they still come under that umbrella term, and it helps them for adolescents later on. Is when they're learning different concepts in specific subjects, they can actually understand that language does come in under umbrella terms in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's one thing that you mentioned that was is really pertinent, is understanding that behaviour is communication. And that can tell us often a lot more than the words that they're using.
Yes.
So,
definitely.
I'll often, ask a child, how are you feeling? And they go, yeah, okay. And you could tell just from the way that their facial expression was, but they're not okay. And I think it's about helping them to have that conversation, to go, oh, actually, you don't look okay.
Yeah.
And it invites them to that opportunity to share something then, isn't it? Any final words before we finish today?
No, just thank you for having us both. We've really enjoyed our time with you.
Oh, thank you so much. And, we really do appreciate you coming today to talk about your role, but also the importance of language communication, helping our parents to be able to sort of develop the children's language, but also to try and understand where they may need to put in extra support and seek out that additional support. And I know you mentioned so many tips and different resources as well. We'll make sure that those are put into the podcast description at the end, so that they can parents listening can access that. So diolch yn fawr, thank you very much for joining us on our Tonnau Talks on understanding words and actions with Cerys Beckett and Kim, and we would welcome you to scan our QR codes to access our previous Tonnau Talks, but also we do a different Tonnau Talks which is called Tonnau Tyfu, where you as parents can write into us with questions about your child, and we do our best to answer that on that podcast. Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thank you.